also feel it's germane for any group to have an agenda, a structure to follow throughout the meeting, whether they're following Robert's Rules of Order or not. So I'll leave this up here for a short time, then it'll disappear, and you have to remember, germane. So, covered a little bit of history on Robert's Rules, a little bit of history on Toastmasters, and how it comes into Robert's Rules. Our founder in 1924, his name was Ralph Smedley in California. He had gone to meetings, and he was introduced to Robert's Rules of Order, and it really affected him. And the interesting part about Toastmasters is the inspiration that Smedley got from that turned us into an international organization, over 100 countries. Our club is number 511, established in 1947, and now they have thousands of clubs. So it's interesting how Jefferson inspired Cushing, Cushing inspired Henry and Robert, and Smedley and Toastmasters. So I get to play Toastmaster today and introduce people as we go. Just a little overview since we don't have a written schedule. There's 5 sessions today. I'll be handling the first one, which I've already started. I'll go into some definitions, handling the main motion. I'll be followed by Doug Feller, who will do incidental motions, followed by Nancy, privileged motions, and then we'll take a break. And following a break, you'll have Angie Palmer, incidental motions, Laura Dowler with some special things. So, here's my props on definitions. A quorum. That's a word that's used a lot in any type of governmental agency. A quorum basically means the legal number of people required to conduct business. That number is going to be different depending on your body. I serve on a board of trustees, which is only a 3-person board. A quorum is 2. So in general terms, if you think about a quorum as 50% plus add that percentage that's partial. If it's 5, it's 2.5, which is 3 to have a quorum. Next word, constitution. Now I think that's a really strong word, and there's a denotation that comes with that for me. The first thing I think of is the United States Constitution. Everybody should have a constitution. It tells you who you are, what you're about, what you're made of, and your purpose. Now some bodies may not have a constitution. You might be a subcommittee or a temporary group. If you don't have a constitution, you need to have a purpose, and it's a good idea to have a mission statement. Number 3 is bylaws. Now every organization has written bylaws. Those are not necessarily germane to Robert's Rules of Order, but they're separate from that. It generally takes 2/3 vote of an assembly to change bylaws, which is a little bit different than standing rules, which only takes a majority to change. Standing rules are things like setting the time to meet, the place, and the location. Now, a lot of elected boards, they'll have an annual meeting, and that's a good time to go over their standing rules. We do that in townships, have a special annual meeting, and talk about how many times a month we're going to meet, and where, when, and also things like our agenda, how we're going to handle our agenda through the year, in the order of business. That takes us to main motions. That's the section that I'll be talking about today. Main motions are a part of everybody's session today because there can always only be one main motion on the floor at a time. More than one motion can be on the floor, but only one main motion. In order to start a meeting, you need what's called a presiding officer. It could be Mr. Chairman, it could be Madam President, or whatever else the body decides to address that person that leads the meeting. They have equal voting as anyone else, but they do have special responsibilities that they have to follow. So today, the person that's handling each session will act as your presiding officer. And I'll leave main motions up there because that's what we're going to first. Now, with any type of meeting, luckily you'll have an agenda in advance and you'll know what you're doing before you get to the meeting. So you should have studied the issues already and have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen at that meeting. The presiding officer should also follow the agenda. So at this point, I'll use a township meeting as an example. In ours, we start with the Pledge of Allegiance, we start on time, we go over reading the meeting minutes, we go over old business, we have committee reports, and Barb is actually our chairman for our park committee. She'll get up and give her report on the park committee, zoning commission meetings, and that type of thing. But at this point, we are at possibly some old business. There may be some issues that become a main motion be voted on old business. But I'm going to forward us to new business. So the very first thing is, think of the whole thing as everything being on a table. Right now, first thing we need is a motion. People have to have an idea of what to talk about. So the presiding officer would either go down the agenda and say, okay, at this point we have the township computer on the agenda. At this time, I'd like to ask if anybody has any motion to bring to the table in that regard. The chair would recognize whoever in the body had indicated they wanted to speak, and they would say something to the effect of, Mr. President, I make a motion that we purchase a computer for the township for $500 so we can schedule the township meetings. Okay. The president would then require a second for there to be a conversation. Keep in mind, if there's no second, and this is one way Robert's Rules of Order can be a real time saver. If nobody wants to talk about it except one person, there's no conversation. Without a second, that's it. And I'll ask for the next item to be brought to the table. There can only be one motion on main motion at a time. So for this particular exercise to explain this, to get a second does not require permission or my acknowledgement from anybody. There could be several seconds to say I second the motion. I just heard Gary second that motion. As the presiding officer, it's my responsibility to make sure that everyone understands the question. So at this point, I repeat. Today we have a quorum, so we can do business. We had a motion to purchase a computer for $500 to do scheduling for the township, and we have a second. Now we're at number 3. It's on the table. The person that made that motion no longer owns that idea. It's on the table and it belongs to the body. And no other main motion can be there. As the presiding officer, I would then, after repeating the motion, ask for debate. Now the key here, the first person to have the opportunity to debate is the one that presented the motion in the first place. And generally they'll be speaking in favor of the motion. But don't let that fool you. Just because you make the motion or second it does not necessarily mean you're in favor of that motion. It means you want to discuss it. And that's a big misconception a lot of people have. I make a motion and second